So let's go over this way, and we're going to look at another site that surrounds us. I mean, when we're in the area of the Nahal Guvrin, this main entryway into the Judean Hills, we have a ton of sites all around us.
Can you explain what an archaeological survey involves?
Archaeological survey is documenting whatever we have on surface in a site or a region.
Is it accurate to say that the survey is typically the initial step before the excavation begins?
Usually yes, because survey gives us some clues and hints about what's supposed to be in this specific site. For example, once we came to Tel Burna, we initiated the project with a surface survey, and based on this, we estimated the size of the site in various periods. We also would be able to talk about which areas were occupied in which period. And for example, when we excavated in the western terrace of the site, we knew that this area should have late Bronze Age finds, and we confirmed it by the excavation that just below the surface we reached the 13th century BCE without anything above it. So the survey clearly helped us to understand the site before we start the excavation.
What are the main purposes of conducting an archaeological survey, and could you mention a well-known example?
Well, there are many reasons archaeologists survey. One of them is like if you've gone to a site, you want to survey the site to see where, get a representative sample of the sherds and where they're at. Others are you're surveying the region around the town to get the hinterland, the agricultural area, the extramural suburbs in relationship to the town. Sometimes you're doing a survey to find stuff. One of the most famous surveys is the Gezer survey, where we found boundary inscriptions.
What are some of the challenges faced during archaeological surveys, and can you please provide a specific case for illustration?
There's issues sometimes with archaeological survey. It's not foolproof. It gives us data that we can use and hopefully prove through excavations. It's very useful because it's, as I said, inexpensive. Anybody can go and apply for the survey license and then carry out the surveys. But if you really want to be more certain about what archaeological periods are on an ancient site, you need to prove the survey through excavations. And there's a good example of this. Not too far from here, the site of Khirbet Kiafa was surveyed in a survey of the entire Shvela region. And in the survey, it showed that there was a lot of different Iron Age periods. There was, that they had from the 10th, the 9th, the 8th, the 7th centuries, and down into the Hellenistic period. And it turns out it probably has some of those periods, but the main one is the 10th century. And when they excavated the site, the entire site was predominantly occupied, built even in the 11th and the 10th centuries BC, even though in the survey you could find forms here or there that could be dated to other periods. And this brings up another issue. Survey is only as good as what the pottery is, and also your pottery knowledge. And the more we excavate, and the more we find well-defined archaeological periods in an excavation, the better we can have forms, that's the potteryware, that can change over time, that can be indicative to a particular period. And a good example of this is the so-called lamellic handle or rim. It was thought for many years that the lamellic rim and handle only dated to the 8th century and maybe into the 7th century BC. But in the last 10 years or so, it's been shown that this handle, as well as the rim, which you could find on these sites, also goes back into the 10th and the 9th century and continues from the 10th, 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries BC, which means if someone went to a tell and picked up a lamellic rim they would immediately think this is 8th century. But now we know that this type of store jar, unless you're looking very closely to see small changes, could have been from a longer period of time. And that also brings up another limitation with survey. You're really limited in the types of sherds that you find on the site. And it could be that you find something that's really nice and indicative to a particular period. Let's say something that's really hand burnished and obviously from the 10th or the 9th century, or wheel burnished like we have in the 8th century. But you're not necessarily always going to find the very clear indicative forms. And so again, pottery is important for a survey. It's significant. It gives us this data, but you're limited somewhat in your certainty about when the site's going to be actually occupied.
What kind of findings are most common in the survey?
In general, most of the finds that we are finding we discover in the surface survey is all kinds of fragments of walls that you can visible on surface. But the main finds are ceramics. Here and there, very nice finds, like we had in the surface survey at Bruno. We had a very nice amulet, well dated to the 14th century BCE. We have also stone objects, but the main finds are ceramic fragments, sherds. And based on this, we can date, because we can date it according to the typology to each period, and based on this we can understand better the history of settlement in each site.
What responsibilities do you have at the excavation site?
We measure soil and sediment. We use X-ray fluorescent machine, spectrometer, and it provides us content of chemical elements on those samples or sediments. And those elements, chemical elements, are usually closely connected to the past human activities. So we can determine functional areas, we can find places where there was dust deposition, where there was accumulation of copper alloy, etc.
When do you usually get to analyze the data you've collected from the field?
We can measure directly at the TEL. It provides you fast data, so you know the concentrations of various elements. But it's also good to sample, take sediments to the laboratory and measure them. We can determine not only chemical concentrations, but also grain size. We can determine content of carbon and nitrogen, which are closely connected to those chemical elements. It helps us to create a story. What happened there in the past? What happened there in Iron Age, Bronze Age?
How accurate is the information from the survey compared to what you find during the actual excavation?
Wow, this is a good question. Sometimes you don't find something in the surface survey, and then in the excavation you reach it as a level. Here we had the luck to see that I can say that the excavation confirmed our results of the surface survey. I think that the main reason that we used here high resolution, but we also did the shovel test piece and the XRF, so all the three gave us quite a very good results.
On what basis do you determine the scope of archaeological survey?
If you're doing a large regional survey, it gives you a broad picture of the occupational layers of that region. If you're doing a survey associated with a specific site, naturally the excavations provide a lot more data, but the survey gives you what's outside of the TEL. It also gives you a picture of how that region was used and that site was used. And in some cases, like Tal Gezer, we actually have ancient boundary markers. And so that provides a great picture of the boundary between what was considered the city limits and what was considered outside the city limits.
What value does your work add to the process of archaeological survey?
We are able to determine strata more precisely than archaeologists do. We can see and we can measure differences between different layers, and it's impossible to describe those layers using eyes. We can use chemistry and other methods to find and define archaeological layers in strata.
Which techniques did you use to conduct the survey at your site?
So here at Tel Burna, we used 3 different methods of survey. One is the surface survey with high resolution. So we focused on each area and collected and analyzed it by itself. The second method that we used is shovel test pits, which we dug 30 centimeter pits all over the site, a diameter of 1 meter, and sifting everything. And the third method that we used here was XRF survey. When we combined all the 3, we get very nice results about the history of the settlement here, and also the edges of the settlement, and where in each area, or when in each area, the site was occupied.
Can you share an insight from the most recent survey carried out in the area?
We defined the visible architecture or visible areas inside the site. We used drone pictures, we used some photogrammetry, 3D models, and all kinds of maps to try or aerial photos to see the different areas in the site. And then we made like a plan of, I think, 14 sub areas in the site. And when we went to survey the site, we were about a group of 25 volunteers and staff members, and we were divided to 5 groups. Each group has its own sub area, and each area got its own bag with the shells we collected, and then we can see the differences between the different areas at the site, and then we can know much more about the periods, not only what periods were in the site, but also what is when did the site was large, when it was small, etc.
Could you describe the survey process at Ether and how it relates to excavation work?
We carried out a survey of Kirbet Eter over here. For a long time, I've been looking at the site, wanting to survey it. I've been visiting it over the years. It is a small Iron Age, primarily, site. We just looked at pottery on the surface. And why I'm particularly interested in it is because in the region that we are, in the Nahal Guvrim, in the Bible, in Joshua chapter 15, verse 42, through 44, we have what's called the Libna district. We're standing on Tel Burna, which we believe is biblical Libna. The name is also known as Bulnab, which probably preserves the name. Not too far from us in this wadi over here, we have Wadi Abu Laban, which preserves this biblical name. And you have Eter, which is right here. In fact, the name has been preserved until this very day. Kirbet Eter, which is the same name in Joshua chapter 15, verse 42. And so when we went to the site, the goal was to see and compare, based upon the archaeological excavations that were carried out here over the last 10 years, where we have a nice 13th century level, a 10th century destruction, which perhaps relates to Shishak, a very nice fortification of the large casemate wall with a gate, and the large fortifications in different areas, a building on top, which was in use from the 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries, and fell out of use in the early 6th centuries. Is it the same site that we have there? And what we found in this archaeological survey, which we carried out much the same way, laid it out into topographic features, carried bags that people would pick up the pottery from each one of these different topographic features. What we found is it does have the same periods. Predominantly, it has remains from the 10th a bit, then definitely 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries. And on top of it, even though it is not as well built as the town that we're on, which is a clear fortified town, there is a small fortification there that seems to be a much smaller type of casemate wall, which means that the people that built this site likely related to the people that built Lachish, which is part of the Judaic kingdom, as part of the fortification, the border area between Gath and Ashdod and Ashkelon and Gaza, which are this direction, fortifying this entryway into the kingdom of Judah. This is a more significant site than Eter, which is there. But Lachish is much more significant, but it's not really important that you talk about which side's the most important, because they're all part of this town system that we can read about in Isaiah, we can read about it in Kings, and especially in Joshua chapter 15. And so what's interesting about it is its similarity to what we have here and its historical geographical connection in terms of a site identification. One last thing about both of these sites, they are both in use in the same exact periods. You have casemate walls, which we're standing on right now, these casemate walls, that are in use, again, from the 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries BC. But in 1948, in the War of Independence, there were before the IDF, there were, let's call them Israeli soldiers that dug foxholes in the very walls that fell to Sennacherib and probably other kings like Hazael and maybe Nebuchadnezzar in the 7th century. And they were using these walls to go against the Arab town of Beit Guvrin. We have bullet casings, we even have a dog tag and other military personnel. We found that here, and we also found it at Eter, dug into the casemate walls, and you can see from an aerial how these foxholes were dug and faced that direction. And so what makes me excited is the landscape until you have helicopters and tanks and missile guidance and drones. It hasn't changed. This valley was always been important in the larger history of this country, from the earliest times that we don't know about to the biblical era when we could talk about Shishak and Hazael, or even in 2nd Chronicles chapter 14, you have Zerah the Cushite. Let's just say you have in 2nd Chronicles, Zerah the Cushite goes against the city of Marashah, which is this direction. It's an important region that is an access point from the Hebron Hills to the coastal plain. And these sites, which we've excavated and now surveyed at Kirbet Eter and here at Tel Borna/Libna, are an important part of that entire sequence. So survey and excavations tell us a lot about what's going on.
If you enjoyed this video, please give me the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more ancient world and archaeology content.